My name's Owen. I'm 32, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the useless one. That's not something I came up with for dramatic effect. That's what my parents actually called me. Not once in a fit of anger, not as a joke, but as my permanent label. The useless one. It was like a brand burned into me before I even had a chance to prove who I was. My sister, Claire, on the other hand, was the family prodigy. From the moment she could walk, they made it clear that she was the golden child, the investment, the future. I was the background noise in a house that only ever clapped for her. Growing up, I learned pretty fast that affection in my family wasn't free. It had to be earned, and even then, it came with conditions. When I brought home a B+, my mom would sigh and say, "You just don't have your sister's focus." When Claire got an A, there'd be a celebration, a dinner out, a dozen photos. My dad would raise his glass and say, "That's my girl," making the family proud. I remember once when I was 10, I built a small robot for the school fair. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. The judges loved it. I even got a ribbon. My dad walked past the table, looked at it, then at me, and said, "Cute." Claire could have made it walk faster. Then he moved on. It's funny, when you grow up being compared to a prodigy, you stop trying to compete. You start surviving instead. I did the chores no one noticed, filled the silences no one wanted to hear, and learned to be invisible. I got a part-time job at 16 because my parents said they didn't believe in handouts. Meanwhile, they gifted Claire a brand new convertible for her 16th birthday, red, with a ribbon on top. When she got into Yale, the whole town knew within 24 hours. There was a full-page announcement in the local paper, a catered party in our backyard, and a speech from my dad that could have been aired on TV. I still remember his words like they were carved into me. "Claire is proof that hard work and good breeding pay off." He didn't even glance at me during the applause. By that time, I'd already accepted my role as the family disappointment. I didn't go to college right away. I worked odd jobs, saved money, and eventually started helping out at a small repair shop. The owner, a quiet guy named Martin, taught me how to fix things, real things. Engines, generators, old machines no one believed could work again. I liked it. It was honest work, and for once, I didn't feel useless. My parents, of course, called it wasting potential. My mom once said, "You could at least do something respectable like accounting." Fixing junk doesn't suit a Lawson. Claire, meanwhile, climbed every ladder laid in front of her. Top of her class, summa cum laude, internship at a hedge fund, and then a cushy position at my dad's company before she even graduated. My dad ran a logistics firm, big contracts, international deals, the kind of empire that made him a local legend. And Claire, naturally, became his heir apparent. By 25, she was on the board. By 27, she was already giving orders that even senior staff obeyed. I didn't envy her at first. I just detached. We lived different lives in different worlds. But the more successful she became, the more my parents leaned into humiliating me, as if every promotion she got was proof that I didn't measure up. Thanksgiving dinners turned into corporate briefings about her achievements. "You should take notes, Owen," my dad would joke, cutting into his steak. "Maybe you'll learn something about discipline." Claire would smirk and say, "He's doing his best, Dad." Not everyone's built for success. It was the way she said it, the fake sympathy that stung worse than the insults. But the real turning point came last year when my father invited me, for the first time in years, to attend one of his company galas. "Family should be there," he said. I almost didn't go, but curiosity got the better of me. The event was held at the downtown hotel, decked out like something out of a movie, chandeliers, champagne, people in tuxedos laughing too loud. I showed up in my only decent suit, a hand-me-down that still smelled faintly of mothballs. I figured I'd blend in quietly and maybe slip out early. But the moment I walked in, I felt the stares. My dad was on stage, giving a speech about legacy and leadership, and when he saw me, his expression tightened. "Oh," he said into the mic. "Even Owen made it tonight." The crowd chuckled politely. My face burned. I forced a smile and nodded. He went on, "This is a proud moment for the Lawson family. Claire has not only upheld our name, she's elevated it. She's the future of Lawson International." Then he raised a glass to her. People cheered. My mom dabbed her eyes. Claire stood beside him, glowing under the spotlight, and for a brief second, she turned to me. Her eyes met mine, not with warmth, not with pride, just amusement. like she was watching a spectator at her coronation. After that night, I started noticing small changes, things that didn't add up. My dad stopped inviting me to family dinners altogether. My mother sent me short, clipped texts. "Claire's busy this week, maybe next time." I'd occasionally stop by the house to drop something off, only to find the locks changed. When I asked about it, my father said, "Oh, we upgraded security. Don't take it personally." But I did. Of course I did. Then came the moment that still replays in my head. Claire's Yale graduation. It was supposed to be her big day, her triumph. My parents rented out a section of the auditorium, complete with a banner that said Lawson Legacy. I sat alone in the back, wearing a suit I could barely afford to dry clean, while my family filled the front rows like royalty. When the ceremony ended, the dean invited my father on stage to give a short speech, a special family moment, he called it. My dad took the microphone and, smiling proudly, announced that Claire would not only be taking over as CEO one day, but would also inherit everything. The $12.5 million estate, the company, even his personal watch, a symbol of legacy and leadership. The crowd clapped. My mother teared up. Claire hugged him and whispered something that made them both laugh. I just sat there, hands clenched, trying not to look like I cared. But I did. I cared more than I wanted to admit. That's when it happened. As the crowd began to disperse, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, and there stood a man I'd never seen before. Black suit, neatly combed hair, the kind of presence that instantly commands attention. He handed me a sealed envelope and said quietly, "Mr. Lawson, your father forgot who really owns it all." I blinked, confused. "Excuse me." He leaned closer. "It's time to remind him." And before I could ask anything else, he walked away into the crowd, disappearing like a shadow. I sat there staring at the envelope, my heart pounding. The seal was embossed, my grandfather's crest. The same crest that used to hang above my father's office door before he had it replaced with the company logo. My grandfather, the real founder of Lawson International, had built everything from scratch after the war. He was a hard, no-nonsense man, but fair, the kind who believed in earning your place. He passed when I was 12, but I remember him clearly. He used to say, "Legacy isn't what you're given, it's what you protect." I hadn't heard his name mentioned in years. My father barely spoke of him. My hands trembled as I held that envelope. For a moment, I thought about throwing it away. I didn't want to get caught in whatever drama this was. But something in me, something tired, angry, and deeply buried, wouldn't let me. So I slipped it into my jacket and walked out before anyone noticed. As I stepped into the cold evening air, my phone buzzed with a message from my father. "Don't make a scene, Owen. Be proud of your sister for once." I didn't reply. I just stared at the message, then at the envelope in my hand. The city lights reflected off the wax seal, and for the first time in my life, I felt something new. Not sadness, not jealousy. Something colder. Purpose. When I got home that night, I placed the envelope on my kitchen table, sat down, and stared at it for a long time. Whatever was inside, I knew it wasn't just paper. It was history. It was truth. And maybe, just maybe, it was the first crack in the perfect image my parents had built around Claire. But before I opened it, I noticed something odd, faint handwriting on the back, written in my grandfather's old-fashioned script, "For the rightful heir." I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid of what I'd find, but because, for the first time, I wasn't sure who my family really was anymore. And when I finally broke the seal the next morning, I realized that everything I'd been told about my place in this family was a lie. The envelope contained several sheets of thick parchment paper, the kind my grandfather always used, neatly folded with a handwritten note on top. His handwriting was unmistakable, firm, slanted, deliberate. I unfolded the first page, and as I began to read, the words hit me like a punch to the chest. It wasn't a letter. It was a copy of his will. Not the one my father had shown everyone years ago after the funeral, but an older version, or maybe the real version. The document stated that the controlling shares of Lawson International, the family estate, and several investment trusts were to pass not to my father, but to his grandchildren. It even specified conditions. The heir would be the grandchild who demonstrates character, integrity, and independence, not entitlement. And then, beneath that, a signature from my grandfather and two witnesses. My name was on the attached document, not Claire's. To my grandson, Owen Lawson, it said. For the one who builds, not the one who takes. I just sat there, stunned, the paper trembling in my hands. For years, I thought my grandfather had left everything to my father. That's what Dad always said. He told me there wasn't much left after taxes and restructuring. But this was something else. A legal declaration that contradicted everything we'd been told. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a lawyer or money for one. So I did the only thing that felt right. I called Martin, the guy who owned the repair shop where I worked. He was like a quiet mentor to me, always calm, never judging. When I told him what I found, he didn't say much at first. Then he said, "Owen, people like your father don't hide documents like that unless they're afraid of what's in them." That sentence stayed with me. I tried reaching out to my mom the next day, casually at first. I called her and asked if she remembered anything about Grandpa's original will. She went silent for a few seconds, then said, "Why are you bringing that up now?" I said I just found something that seemed off. She gave a cold laugh and said, "Owen, you really need to stop living in the past. Your grandfather trusted your father to make the right decisions. That's all that matters." I could hear Claire's voice in the background, telling someone to pass the champagne. It sounded like they were celebrating something. When I mentioned that the man at graduation gave me something, the tone of her voice changed instantly. "What man?" she asked sharply. "Who was he?" I told her I didn't know. Silence. Then, she said quietly, "Whatever you were given, Owen, destroy it. It's probably some kind of scam." That's when I knew I couldn't tell them anything more. Over the next few weeks, things got strange. My father called out of nowhere one evening, his voice forced and tight. "I heard you've been asking questions about Grandpa's will," he said. "Let's not go down that road. The company's fine, the family's fine, and there's no reason to stir up old nonsense." I asked him how he knew I was asking. He didn't answer. He just said, "You've always been a good boy, Owen. Don't ruin that now." Then he hung up. After that, I started getting visits. First subtle, then not so much. One afternoon, I came home to find a man sitting in a black sedan across the street. Sunglasses, no expression. He was there again the next day, and the next. When I finally walked up to him to ask what he wanted, he rolled up the window and drove off. I told Martin about it, and he frowned. "They're watching you," he said. "Your father's nervous." Meanwhile, Claire was everywhere: magazine features, interviews, charity events. Her name was plastered on every article about the next generation of visionary leaders. She talked about family legacy, like she was carrying the torch of destiny. Watching her give speeches about hard work while I knew the truth felt surreal. I started keeping my distance from everything Lawson related, but staying quiet only seemed to make them more suspicious. One morning, I woke up to an email from HR at Lawson International. It said my father had extended an offer for me to come work for the company. A small position, the email read, as a gesture of goodwill. The salary was pitiful, and the description was vague. But what caught my attention was the timing. Just a week after I'd found the will. I didn't respond. 2 days later, Claire called. She rarely ever called me directly, always through Mom or Dad, so I knew it wasn't going to be pleasant. "Hey, little brother," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Dad told me you've been curious about some things lately." "Curious?" I asked. About Grandpa. About the company." She laughed lightly. "You know how people talk. I just wanted to remind you, we're family. And family doesn't go digging through old ghosts." Her tone turned slightly sharper. "You don't want to make things awkward for yourself. Dad's been generous, considering how little you've contributed to the family." I clenched my jaw. "I don't need his generosity." "Oh, come on," she said. "We all know you wouldn't survive without Mom and Dad's help. That repair shop of yours isn't exactly Wall Street." "I'm doing fine," I said flatly. "Sure you are," she replied with a smirk in her voice. "Anyway, I just thought I'd warn you before Dad gets really upset. You know how he gets." I didn't answer. She sighed. "Look, Owen, there's a dinner next week at the house. Come by. Let's just clear the air." Okay. Against my better judgment, I went. The house hadn't changed. Same marble floors, same portraits of Claire on the walls, same air of quiet perfection. When I walked in, my mom gave me a quick hug, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. My father sat at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone. Claire was at his right side, her Yale ring flashing under the light. We ate in near silence until my dad said, "Owen, I've been thinking. It's time you take more responsibility." Maybe if you worked under your sister, you'd finally learn something. Claire chuckled. I could use an assistant. Someone to fetch coffee, maybe. My mother laughed too. That light, polished laugh she used when she wanted to sound supportive but superior. I'm not working for Claire, I said quietly. The table went still. My father's eyes narrowed. Excuse me. I said no. I repeated. I have my own job. He leaned back, voice cold. You call fixing garbage a job? Do you know what people say about you? That we wasted money raising a child who doesn't care about success. I don't care about your version of success, I said, meeting his stare. The silence after that was heavy. Claire broke it first. Dad, maybe he's right. Not everyone can handle pressure. Some people are meant for simpler lives. I stood up. Enjoy dinner. As I walked toward the door, my father's voice followed me, low, seething. Don't test me, Owen. You've already taken enough from this family. I paused, turned slightly, and asked, what exactly have I taken? He didn't answer. When I got home that night, the envelope was gone. I tore the place apart. Drawers, shelves, everything. Nothing. Whoever took it knew exactly where to look. I called Martin, panicked. He told me to calm down and come to his shop in the morning. When I arrived, he was waiting with a serious expression and a man I'd never seen before. Tall, late 40s, wearing a brown jacket. Owen, Martin said, this is Samuel. He's an attorney. He used to work with your grandfather. Samuel nodded. Your grandfather anticipated this. I believe you found part of what he left for you. He reached into his briefcase and handed me another envelope, smaller, older, with the same crest. This was meant to reach you once you turned 30. Your father intercepted it. I opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, dated years ago. Owen, it began. If you are reading this, it means my faith in your father was misplaced. He has likely told you that I left him everything. That is not true. I founded Lawson International for family, not ego. You will know when the time is right to act. Trust your instincts, and trust no one wearing our name until you've seen their true colors. At the bottom, there was an address. Samuel looked at me. That's a private storage unit registered under your grandfather's old company. He set it up before he passed. For the first time, I felt something shift inside me. The fog of helplessness replaced by a spark of clarity. But before I could say anything, my phone buzzed. It was Claire. A text. Hope you enjoyed dinner, Owen. Dad says you'll regret the attitude. Don't push him. I didn't reply, because at that moment, I realized something my family had never expected. I wasn't scared anymore. I was done being the useless one, and I was going to find out exactly what my grandfather wanted me to see. The address on the letter led to a part of town I hadn't visited in years, an industrial zone full of storage facilities, factories, and shipping yards. I drove there early one morning before work, the sky still gray and heavy with fog. The unit number was written in my grandfather's familiar pen, 37B. I parked outside, my heart pounding like I was about to uncover something forbidden. When I unlocked the door, the scent of dust and old metal hit me. Inside were shelves lined with file boxes, a few old crates, and a metal cabinet with my grandfather's initials carved into it. It looked untouched for decades. I spent hours digging through documents, old company records, blueprints, contracts. Most of it didn't make much sense to me until I found a thick folder marked Founders' Rights. Inside were papers showing that my grandfather had set up a hidden clause in the company's founding agreement, one that allowed the majority control of Lawson International to revert to his designated heir if the current management failed to meet certain ethical standards or misused family assets. And the kicker? The clause was still active. There were receipts, financial ledgers, and correspondences showing that my father had been quietly funneling company money into shell corporations, using Claire's signature in several cases. There were emails between lawyers discussing reallocation of assets and erasure of redundant ownership records. My grandfather had left everything documented. At the very bottom of the stack was a handwritten note that looked newer than the rest. It said, "If Owen finds this, contact Reynolds." There was a phone number. Reynolds turned out to be another lawyer, one who'd been forced out of the company years ago under mysterious circumstances. When I called, his tone was calm but cautious. "You're Charles Lawson's grandson?" he asked. "Yes," I said. There was a pause, then a quiet chuckle. "I was wondering when this day would come. You'd better come see me in person." We met at his office that afternoon. He was an older man, white-haired, sharp-eyed. The the kind of person who notices everything but says little. When I handed him the documents, he went through them one by one, his brow tightening. Finally, he leaned back and said, "Your grandfather was smarter than people gave him credit for. He knew your father would abuse his power. So, what does this mean for me?" I asked. He folded his hands. "It means you're the legal heir to Lawson International. Everything, the estate, the trusts, the company, is yours. But claiming it won't be easy. Your father has buried every trace of this will. If he finds out you know, he'll do everything to destroy it, and you." I remember just sitting there, trying to process it all. For years I'd been told I was worthless, that the company was none of my business, that I was lucky to even be tolerated. And now I was hearing that the entire empire my father built his identity around, the company he'd used to humiliate me my whole life, technically belonged to me. Reynolds must have seen the look on my face, because he said quietly, "Owen, this isn't about revenge. Your grandfather wanted the company to stay in the right hands. You'll have to prove you're ready for that responsibility." I nodded, but deep down, something darker had already started to form. I didn't want to just inherit it. I wanted them to feel what they'd done, the humiliation, the dismissal, the years of mockery disguised as parenting. Still, I said nothing. I took the documents, thanked him, and left. That night, my phone rang again. It was my mother. "Where have you been?" she asked sharply. "Your father's been trying to reach you." "I've been busy," I said flatly. She sighed dramatically. "Busy doing what?" "We're worried about you. You've been acting strange lately, paranoid, secretive. Claire said you were snooping around the company's old offices." "Is that true?" "I wasn't snooping," I said. "Owen," she said, lowering her voice. "Listen to me carefully. Whatever fantasy you're chasing, drop it. Your father has enough on his plate without dealing with your nonsense. You should be grateful he's even willing to let you stay part of this family after everything you've pulled." "After everything I've pulled?" I said, incredulous. "You mean after everything you've hidden?" Her voice turned icy. "Watch your tone." Then she hung up. That night, my apartment was broken into. The lock wasn't forced. Someone had a key. Nothing was stolen except one thing, the folder from the storage unit. The rest of the place was untouched. I found muddy footprints near the window, and the glass coffee table had a faint scratch across it, like someone had rested a briefcase there. I didn't bother calling the police. I already knew who was behind it. For the next few days, I didn't go home. I stayed with Martin, who insisted I sleep in the back of the shop. "They're escalating," he said. "Your father's desperate." He was right. 2 days later, I got an email from the company's HR department again, this time addressed formally. It said, "Mr. Lawson, this is to inform you that due to recent behavior damaging to the family's reputation, your parents have decided to withdraw all financial support, including housing and insurance benefits." The irony made me laugh. They'd cut me off from money I never had. Then came the part that made my stomach drop. "Additionally, your presence at any family-owned property is now considered trespassing under current policy." They'd officially disowned me. That same afternoon, I got a call from Claire. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. "Hey," she said, sounding unusually calm. "I heard you've been going through a rough patch." I didn't reply. "Owen, look, I don't know what's gotten into you. Dad's just trying to protect the family. You know how much pressure he's under. Why don't you come by the house? We'll talk. Just us." I should have known better, but part of me, the part that still wanted to believe my sister had some humanity left, said yes. When I arrived, the house felt eerily quiet. The staff wasn't around, the curtains were drawn, and the air smelled faintly of my father's cologne. Claire greeted me in the foyer, her expression unreadable. "Dad's in the study," she said softly. "He just wants to clear the air." I followed her down the hall, each step heavier than the last. The study door was closed. She knocked twice and opened it. My father sat behind his massive oak desk, hands folded. On the table was a manila envelope, my envelope. "Sit down," he said. I didn't move. "Sit," he repeated more sharply. Reluctantly, I did. He picked up the envelope and held it up. "This. Do you have any idea how dangerous this is?" "Dangerous for who?" I asked. "For you," he said, his tone low and deliberate. "You're playing with things you don't understand. This company, this family, doesn't belong to you. It never did. It belongs to whoever my grandfather chose," I said. He laughed, a slow, bitter laugh. "Your grandfather was a sentimental fool. He didn't understand what it takes to build something lasting. I did. I made Lawson International what it is today. You stole it, I said quietly. His expression hardened. I preserved it. You think a naive boy like you could run an empire like this? You fix engines, for God's sake. I stood. You can't bury this forever. He smiled thinly. Oh, I already have. That's when he nodded toward the door. Two men stepped inside, both large, both silent. One of them held a small USB drive. My father looked at me and said, "Everything you found, every document, every letter, gone. We've cleaned it all. Digital backups, too. And you, Owen, you're finished." He slid a paper across the desk. "Sign this. It states you renounce any claim to the family assets and agree to stay away from company property. In return, I'll make sure you're comfortable." I stared at the paper. "No." He sighed. "I thought you might say that." He gestured to one of the men. The guy stepped forward, grabbed my shoulder, and forced me back into the chair. My father leaned in close, his voice cold and almost amused. "You always thought you were better than your role. But you were born to be nothing. That's all you'll ever be." The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. I wrenched free and stormed out before they could stop me. Claire followed me to the driveway, calling my name. "Owen, wait." I turned around, and for a split second, I saw something that almost looked like guilt in her eyes. But then she said quietly, "You shouldn't have come back here." "Did you know?" I asked. "About the will? About what Dad's done?" She hesitated. "It's complicated." I laughed bitterly. "No, it's not. It's theft." She stepped closer. "You don't understand what he's capable of." "Neither do you," I said, then got in my car and drove away. When I got home, I found my apartment door open again. This time, there was a letter on my kitchen table, one of my own, the letter from my grandfather, ripped in half. No signature, no message, just a business card placed on top. It was from Reynolds, and written on the back in black ink were 5 words that made my blood run cold. They got to me. "Be careful." That was the night I realized my family wasn't just cruel. They were dangerous. And whatever came next, I'd have to fight them on their own terms. For the first time in my life, I truly understood what it meant to be alone. The next morning after finding Reynolds' message, I sat in my kitchen staring at the shredded letter, my mind blank. The silence felt heavier than any noise I'd ever known. No calls, no messages, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the lingering smell of cold coffee. I tried to reach Reynolds. His number went straight to voicemail. I emailed him, nothing. Then I called the law office. The receptionist told me he'd taken an unexpected leave of absence. Her tone said everything she wasn't allowed to. By evening, I found out what that meant. A news alert popped up on my phone. Local attorney found dead in apparent accident. No details, no photos, just a short paragraph saying his car had lost control and gone off the road. My stomach turned to ice. I didn't need to be told twice. It wasn't an accident. My father's reach was long, and he had always believed that fear was the best tool of control. For most of my life, I'd thought that meant emotional manipulation. Now I knew better. He didn't just play dirty, he erased problems. And in his eyes, I'd just become one. The following days blurred together. I didn't go to work. Martin called several times, but I couldn't answer. What would I even say? That my family might have had someone killed? That the same people who'd smiled for Christmas photos could destroy a man for knowing too much? I started sleeping on the couch with my shoes still on because I didn't trust the locks anymore. Then one night, around 2 a.m., there was a knock at my door. 3 sharp knocks. I froze. It wasn't the police. They'd call first. It wasn't a neighbor. They'd text. I waited, heart pounding, the sound echoing again. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a wrench I'd left on the counter from fixing a chair. "Owen," a voice said through the door. "It's me." It was Martin. When I opened the door, he looked exhausted, his face pale under the porch light. "You're not safe here," he said immediately. "Pack a bag. You're coming with me." I didn't ask how he knew. I just obeyed. He took me to a cabin about an hour outside the city, one he used during fishing trips, isolated and surrounded by pine trees. When we got there, I finally broke. I told him everything. The will, the threats, the break-ins, the meeting with my father, Reynolds' death. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with every detail. When I finished, he said quietly, "Your father's not just corrupt. He's scared. That makes him unpredictable." I leaned back in the old wooden chair, rubbing my temples. What am I supposed to do, Martin? He's erased everything. Every document, every file. Even if I wanted to fight him, I've got nothing left. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he went to the old fireplace, pulled out a tin box from behind a loose brick, and set it on the table. Inside were a few memory drives, old documents, and an envelope. I've been keeping this for years, he said. Your grandfather gave it to me before he died. Told me to hold on to it until someone came looking. I blinked. You knew? I didn't know what it was for, he said, but I had a feeling it would matter one day. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside were scanned copies of the same documents I'd found, plus one I hadn't seen before. It was a notarized letter from my grandfather's attorney, confirming that any revision to his will would require a secondary witness signature from him, and that no such revision had ever been made. In other words, my father's version of the will was legally void. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I asked quietly. Because if I did, you'd have gone straight to your father, Martin said. And you weren't ready then. He was right. Still, knowing I had the truth didn't feel like power. It felt like a burden. I couldn't take on a man like my father alone. He had lawyers, influence, money, and I had nothing but a pile of papers and a mechanic's paycheck. The next few weeks were a blur of hiding and fear. I kept my phone off most of the time, used cash only, and stayed off social media. I heard through mutual acquaintances that my father had cut ties with me entirely, told everyone I was mentally unstable, possibly addicted, and needed professional help. The smear campaign had begun. Then, one afternoon, while driving back from town, I saw a familiar car parked near the cabin. Black sedan, tinted windows, the same kind I'd seen before outside my apartment. I slowed down, pretending not to notice, then took the long way around. By the time I returned an hour later, it was gone. That night, Martin told me something I didn't expect. You can't stay here forever, he said. He'll find you eventually. You need to think long term. Long term? I asked bitterly. Like what? Changing my name and living in the woods. He met my eyes. No, like taking back what's yours. But you can't fight him head on. You'll lose. That stuck with me. I spent days turning it over in my mind, staring at the flickering light from the fireplace, thinking about every word my father had ever said to me. Useless, disappointment, ungrateful. Each one had shaped me into something small, afraid, invisible. But sitting there, with those documents spread across the table, I realized something else. Maybe my greatest advantage was that he still saw me that way. If he thought I was weak, he'd never see me coming. That thought became the seed of a plan. I didn't know what it would look like yet, but I knew it had to start with patience. I began by quietly gathering everything I could. I went through old contacts, people who'd worked under my grandfather, former accountants, drivers, secretaries, anyone who might still hold fragments of the company's past. Most of them had either retired or disappeared, but one name kept coming up, Eleanor Shaw. She'd been my grandfather's personal assistant for 20 years before my father took over. Finding her took weeks. She was living in a small coastal town, long retired. When I called her, she hesitated but eventually agreed to meet. If you're Charles's grandson, she said softly, I suppose you have a right to know what really happened. When I arrived at her cottage, she greeted me with watery eyes and trembling hands. You look like him, she said. He'd be proud you came. She told me things I'd never heard. How my father had started manipulating the board right after my grandfather's stroke, forging signatures, moving assets, and convincing Claire to back him in exchange for her future inheritance. He made it look legal, she said. But it wasn't. Then she handed me a small key. Your grandfather had a second safety deposit box. Only I and his lawyer knew. If Reynolds is gone, you're the only one left who can open it. The box was located in a private bank downtown, under a pseudonym, C. Harding. It took every ounce of courage I had to walk into that building, heart pounding, expecting security to drag me out at any second. But when they verified the key and ID, the clerk simply nodded and escorted me to a small room. Inside the box were 2 flash drives, a bundle of letters, and a worn photograph of my grandfather holding me as a child. Written on the back were 5 words, "Don't let them rewrite history." I sat there staring at that photo, fighting back the sting in my chest. It hit me then. My grandfather had seen this coming. He'd known what my father and sister would become, and he'd left breadcrumbs for me to follow. When I got back to the cabin that night, I plugged in one of the drives. It contained digital copies of every original document, company share certificate, and notarized statement of ownership, all time-stamped and authenticated. Everything my father had tried to destroy. For the first time in months, I smiled. Not out of joy, but relief. I finally had proof. But I also knew I couldn't use it yet. If I went public, my father would bury it under lawsuits and threats before the ink even dried. I had to be smarter. So I waited, planned, observed. I went back to work at the repair shop, acted like nothing had happened. I stopped contacting anyone connected to the company. I made myself boring, predictable, forgettable, the same useless Owen they always thought I was. And slowly, it worked. My father stopped sending people to follow me. The family's attention drifted back to Claire, who was now preparing for her official appointment as CEO. Publicly, they had already erased me. But privately, I was learning how to fight back. Every night, after work, I'd sit at my small desk, studying company bylaws, learning about corporate takeovers, stock transfers, inheritance disputes. I watched legal lectures online until 2 in the morning, took notes, built spreadsheets, cross-referenced data from the drives. My father thought I'd disappeared into mediocrity again, but really, I was learning how to dismantle his empire one clause at a time. Still, the loneliness cut deep. There were nights I'd sit outside the cabin and wonder if it was even worth it. If I should just disappear and let them keep their poison legacy. Then I'd remember Reynolds, my grandfather, the years of laughter at my expense. And I'd whisper to myself, not yet. The day I saw Claire's face on the cover of Forbes' Next Gen Leaders was the day something inside me clicked into place. The headline read, Claire Lawson, the future of a billion-dollar dynasty. I looked at that magazine for a long time before saying quietly, we'll see about that. Because what my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that their empire was built on a lie. And I finally had the truth. The next few months were quiet, almost too quiet. My father believed he'd won, and that silence gave me space to rebuild. Every morning, I woke up before dawn, drove to the repair shop, worked with my hands until sunset, then came home and worked with my mind until midnight. I had no one cheering me on, no safety net, but for the first time, that didn't bother me. Solitude had become my strength. I started taking night classes at the community college, business law, corporate finance, ethics, estate planning. I didn't tell anyone, not even Martin. I sat in the back of the class, took notes like my life depended on it, and left before anyone could ask questions. I learned how board votes worked, how ownership could shift silently through stock distribution, how trusts could be weaponized or dismantled. The same tools my father had used to bury me. I was learning how to turn them back against him. And slowly, my life started to change. The repair shop grew busier. Word spread that we could fix what others couldn't, and I started taking private contracts, generators, machinery, custom fabrication. I saved every cent. By the end of the year, I had enough to rent a small warehouse on the edge of town. I quit my job at the shop, with Martin's blessing, and started my own company, Lomax Engineering. I didn't use the Lawson name. Not yet. At first, it was just me, one man, a few tools, and a secondhand truck. But business came fast. Local factories needed affordable equipment repair, and my reputation from the shop followed me. Within 6 months, I had 4 employees. Within a year, I had 12. We didn't just fix machines, we rebuilt them better. It was funny, the same skill my father mocked me for, the one he said would never lead anywhere, became the foundation of something real. Something mine. The first real break came from a logistics company called Halverson Freight. One of their warehouses had a power failure that shut down their operations. I drove out at midnight with 2 of my guys, worked through the storm, and had them running again by morning. The owner, a man named Derek, shook my hand and said, "You saved us. Anything you ever need, you call me." That sentence would end up changing everything. A few months later, Derek invited me to a regional business conference, a small event, nothing fancy, just local entrepreneurs sharing contacts. I almost didn't go, but something in me said I should. That's where I met Amelia Torres, a financial consultant with a background in corporate auditing. She was sharp, direct, and didn't flinch when I told her my story. "You're sitting on a gold mine," she said after I showed her the digital files from my grandfather's drives. "But you're treating it like a time bomb. You need to use this strategically, not emotionally." That's when I learned what she meant by leverage. Amelia helped me set up a holding company under a different name, independent, untraceable to the Lawsons. Through her connections, we quietly began acquiring small shares in Lawson International through shell investors. My father had spread ownership across dozens of dummy accounts to keep control, but that decentralization worked both ways. By the end of the first year, I owned nearly 8% of the company, silently, legally, and without my father having a clue. At the same time, Lomax Engineering was expanding. Derek introduced me to other clients, transport companies, manufacturers, even a defense contractor that needed prototype development. I worked nonstop. I hired specialists, upgraded equipment, reinvested every profit. One day, I came home to find a letter from my old college, the same one I dropped out of years ago because my parents refused to help pay tuition. It was an invitation to speak at an alumni event for emerging business owners. The irony made me laugh. I didn't go, but I framed the letter. Meanwhile, the Lawson family empire was showing cracks. My father had pushed for rapid expansion, chasing prestige projects with poor returns. Claire, now officially CEO, was doing endless press interviews, presenting herself as the face of modern leadership. But internally, things were falling apart. I knew because Amelia still had contacts inside their finance department, people who whispered about missing funds and questionable transfers. I didn't act yet. I just watched, waited, gathered information. During that time, I started changing, not just professionally, but personally. I no longer carried myself like the beaten-down son hiding in the corner at family dinners. I spoke with confidence. I walked into meetings with presence. When clients asked about my background, I simply said, "My grandfather taught me how to build things that last." It wasn't a lie. Then came the day that confirmed everything I'd been working toward. Amelia called me one morning, voice trembling slightly with excitement. "Owen, you need to see this," she said. She sent over a financial report, Lawson International's quarterly filing. Their shares had dipped 9% overnight after a failed merger. Investors were panicking. "That's your window," she said. "If you want to take control, this is how it starts." We started small, moving through intermediaries, buying up more stock as panic spread. Within 3 weeks, I controlled 15%. Within 2 months, 21. That's when my father noticed. He must have seen the new investor names in the shareholder reports because suddenly, Lawson International announced an emergency restructuring. It was obvious he was trying to consolidate power before anyone could challenge him. But it was too late. At that point, I wasn't the same man who'd stood in the back of that Yale auditorium. I had my own company, my own money, my own network. I wasn't the useless one anymore. I was a ghost in his system, a name he didn't recognize that was slowly buying back everything he'd stolen. I started dressing the part too. Gone were the secondhand suits. I bought tailored ones, subtle, clean, no labels. When I looked in the mirror, I almost didn't recognize myself. Not because of the clothes, but because of the man behind the eyes. Every small victory brought a quiet satisfaction. I didn't celebrate publicly. I didn't post about it or flaunt it. I kept everything quiet, deliberate, methodical. Then came the moment that changed everything again. One afternoon, while reviewing filings with Amelia, we found something buried deep in the company's archives, a record of a special meeting held 3 years after my grandfather's death. The attendees were my father, 2 board members, and Claire. The purpose? To reaffirm control of family holdings. But the meeting had one fatal flaw. No proper notice was filed with shareholders, which made every decision made there legally invalid. In other words, the transfer of full authority to my father, the event that started all of this, was null. That meant, technically, I could challenge it. But to do that, I'd have to expose myself, go public, reveal who I was. I wasn't ready yet, but the seed was planted. Around that time, I started getting invitations again from people who used to ignore me. Networking events, investment dinners, charity galas. I ignored most of them until one invitation caught my eye. It was from Lawson International. The subject line read, "Annual Gala, Honoring Our Legacy." The same event I'd been mocked at years ago. I almost deleted it. Then I read the tagline. Hosted by CEO Claire Lawson and Chairman Charles Lawson. Something in me clicked. I didn't RSVP right away. I just closed the laptop and sat there for a long time, staring out the window at the skyline. I thought about everything I'd lost, everything I'd built, and everything they still believed was theirs. Then I whispered, Time to remind them who they forgot. Because the boy they used to mock didn't exist anymore. The man who replaced him, the one they'd underestimated into oblivion, was ready. The next morning, I wired a transfer. Enough to buy a controlling interest through proxy shareholders. By the time my father's accountants noticed the movement, the paperwork would already be filed. And in the shadows of my quiet rise, I could almost hear my grandfather's voice again. Legacy isn't what you're given. It's what you protect. Soon, I would protect it and take back everything they'd built on lies. The gala was held at the same luxury hotel downtown, the one where my father once humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. Only this time, I wasn't arriving as the awkward, forgotten son in a hand-me-down suit. I was the invisible shareholder who owned more of Lawson International than anyone in that room. I arrived in a charcoal gray suit, no tie, quiet confidence. No one recognized me at first. The valet took my keys with a polite, "Good evening, sir," and I smiled. The air outside shimmered with the sound of camera flashes and laughter. My father loved events like this. They fed his ego. Claire, too, basked in attention like it was oxygen. Inside, everything looked the same as it had years ago: chandeliers, champagne, and perfectly staged smiles. My father stood near the stage, shaking hands, his laugh loud enough to dominate the room. Claire hovered beside him, radiant in a white evening gown, surrounded by executives. They were untouchable, or so they thought. The presentation began. My father stepped up to the podium, his voice booming with pride. "Tonight," he said, "we celebrate not just our company, but our legacy, the Lawson name that has stood for integrity and excellence for generations." I nearly laughed out loud. He went on to praise Claire's leadership, announcing a historic merger that would, in his words, secure our family's future for decades. As applause erupted, I pulled out my phone and checked the email Amelia had just sent. Confirmation of share registration. It was official. My proxies now held 51% of Lawson International. The company my father claimed to own didn't legally belong to him anymore. Amelia had warned me this moment would come fast and messy. "Once it's filed," she said, "he'll find out within hours. If you're going to make a move, do it immediately. Hit him where it hurts, his pride." That's exactly what I planned to do. I waited until the applause died down. Then, while the next speaker approached the podium, I stepped forward toward the cluster of board members at the front. One of them, Mr. Doyle, my father's oldest ally, noticed me first. His eyes widened. "Owen." My father turned mid-sentence. For a brief second, he froze. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. The microphone was still on. The crowd fell silent. I smiled politely. "Just here to celebrate the Lawson legacy." Claire looked nervous. My father, irritated, forced a laugh. "Well, isn't this something? My son decided to join us. It's good to see you finally take an interest in real business." "Oh, I've been very interested," I said evenly. "In fact, I've spent the past 2 years learning a lot about business. Contracts, trusts, board voting rights." A few people chuckled, thinking it was some kind of family banter. My father gave me a tight smile. "That's adorable, Owen. Maybe one day you'll understand what it takes to." "Actually," I interrupted, pulling a small folder from my jacket, "I think I already do." I handed it to Mr. Doyle. "Those are the new shareholder reports filed this afternoon. Effective immediately, Lawson International has a new majority owner." The room went dead quiet. My father blinked. "What?" I nodded. "You heard me. As of 3:42 p.m., control of the company officially transferred to my holding firm, Orisis Industries." He laughed, but it came out strained. "That's impossible." I shrugged. "You can verify it yourself. The registry was filed through the state exchange and approved by the commission." Mr. Doyle was already flipping through the documents, his face draining of color. Claire looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Dad," she whispered. The silence stretched like an iron chain. Then, finally, my father turned toward me, his voice low but seething. "You think this makes you powerful? You have no idea how this world works." "Maybe not," I said, "but I know how you work. And I've spent my whole life watching you destroy everything decent our family ever stood for. So, yeah, I think I've finally learned enough." The whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Investors, journalists, employees, everyone realizing that the useless son had just dethroned the patriarch. Security began to move. but Claire stopped them with a shaky hand. "Dad, don't," she said under her breath. He ignored her. "This is a mistake. You think paperwork makes you a man? You've humiliated yourself in front of everyone." I stepped closer, keeping my voice calm. "No, Dad. I just reminded them who actually owns this company, and who never should have." That's when Amelia's timing hit perfectly. The ballroom doors opened, and a courier walked in with a manila envelope marked urgent. He handed it to the event coordinator, who passed it straight to my father. "It's from the state corporate registry," she murmured. He tore it open, scanning the document, then froze. His face turned gray. Claire peeked over his shoulder and whispered, "It's real." For a long, unbearable moment, no one moved. Then my father slammed the paper on the podium and barked, "This means nothing. The board still answers to me." "No, they don't," said a voice behind him. It was Mr. Doyle. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Under the bylaws, the majority shareholder has full voting rights and final say over corporate appointments." My father spun around. "You spineless." "I resign," Doyle said simply. "Effective immediately." The other two directors followed suit. Claire's expression shifted from shock to panic. "Dad," but it was too late. The dominoes were already falling. I turned toward the audience, every eye on me. "From this point forward," I said, "Lawson International will no longer be run by greed, intimidation, or family favoritism. It will be rebuilt the way my grandfather intended." People began clapping. Not everyone, but enough that it felt real, genuine. My father just stood there, motionless, gripping the edge of the podium. The veins in his temple bulged. I could almost see the moment it sank in, that the son he'd mocked for being useless had outplayed him completely. Claire's face hardened. "You think this makes you better than us?" she hissed, stepping closer. "You're just like him." "Maybe," I said quietly, "but at least I learned from his mistakes." I walked off the stage without looking back. The applause followed me all the way to the lobby. Outside, the night air was cool and silent. Amelia was waiting by the car, smiling faintly. "You did it," she said. "No," I replied, glancing back at the glowing hotel windows. "I just started, because I knew this wasn't over." My father would fight, claw, and twist every law he could to take it back. Claire would side with him. But this time, I wasn't fighting from the shadows. I was fighting from the top. That night, I stood on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. My phone buzzed, a new message from an unknown number. It read, "You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've awakened." I smiled faintly. "We'll see." Because for the first time in my life, the power was mine, and I had no intention of letting go. The fallout came fast, faster than even I expected. Within 48 hours of the gala, every business outlet in the city was running the same headline: "Lawson International under new ownership after surprise takeover." My phone exploded with calls from journalists, lawyers, and board members who suddenly wanted to reconnect. Amelia handled the chaos with a calm efficiency that made her look almost supernatural. "Let them talk," she said. "Your father's power was built on perception. The moment the illusion breaks, he's nothing." And she was right. By Monday morning, half the company's senior staff had tendered their resignations. The stock that had once soared under my father's control was now stabilizing under mine. Cautious investors liked the change. For the first time in decades, Lawson International was operating transparently. Meanwhile, my father disappeared from public life entirely. The man who had spent his entire existence chasing the spotlight suddenly had nowhere to stand. He tried to challenge the transfer in court, of course, hired an army of lawyers, filed motion after motion. But the evidence was airtight. Every fraudulent signature, every hidden account, every illegal restructuring meeting was documented in my grandfather's files. I still remember sitting in the courtroom the day the judge read the verdict. "Based on the presented evidence," she said, "control of Lawson International and all related assets rightfully belongs to Mr. Owen Lawson." My father didn't even look at me. He just sat there, stone-faced, while Claire's hands trembled beside him. When the judge left, the reporters swarmed us. He stood, his voice barely above a whisper. "You'll regret this," he said. I met his eyes. "No, Dad. I just corrected it." That was the last time we ever spoke. Within months, the family estate, the mansion where I'd grown up being called useless, was repossessed. Not by me, but by the bank. My father had mortgaged it years ago to fund his failed expansions. Without his corporate income, he couldn't pay a cent back. He moved into a small coastal property owned by one of his old associates, out of the public eye. Claire tried to reinvent herself, first as a consultant, then as a philanthropist. But her name was poisoned now. Investors refused to work with her, and every time she tried to step into the spotlight again, her father's scandals followed. I didn't gloat. Not publicly. But when I read the article titled, "Once Golden Lawson Legacy Tarnished by Family Scandal," I won't pretend it didn't feel like closure. As for me, I spent the next year rebuilding everything the right way. We restructured the company, implemented ethics reforms, rehired workers my father had fired for speaking up. Profits rose. So did morale. For the first time, people actually believed in the Lawson name again, not out of fear, but out of pride. One evening, I returned to the company's old headquarters, my grandfather's original office, long abandoned. The building was quiet, the air thick with dust and memory. I walked to his old desk, brushed my hand across the worn surface, and placed the family crest, the one my father had removed years ago, back where it belonged. I stood there for a long time, thinking about the boy I used to be. The one who sat in the back row at his sister's graduation, the one who swallowed every insult, the one who believed he'd never be enough. That boy had died the moment I opened that sealed envelope. And the man who replaced him had built something stronger from the ashes. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was shaky, but familiar. "Owen, I don't expect forgiveness. You won. You always wanted respect. I see that now. Maybe your grandfather saw it first. Whatever you do, protect the name. Don't become me." It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. I burned the letter in the fireplace that night. Not out of hatred, but to let it end where it began, in silence. The next morning, I stood on the balcony of the new headquarters. The skyline stretched endlessly ahead, sunlight reflecting off the windows like glass fire. Amelia joined me with 2 mugs of coffee and a faint smile. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" she said. "Yeah," I replied. "It finally feels right." She raised her mug. "To your grandfather?" I nodded. "To the rightful heir." And as I looked out over the city, the empire that once rejected me, I realized that the revenge was never really about taking what they had. It was about proving I never needed their permission to begin with. The Lawson name was clean again. The company was thriving. And the boy they called useless? He owned it all.